Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, depending on your location. Warm thanks for joining this virtual symposium introducing Dalme, the documentary archaeology of late medieval Europe. This large collaborative project has been underway since 2013 and is now a website ready to inspire and fuel new research of many kinds. My name is Anne Blair, and I am delighted that the Department of History at Harvard, of which I am currently the chair, can serve as the publisher of the website. But the authors of this achievement are more than 24 scholars from France, Belgium, Spain, Italy, the UK, Canada, and the US. I hope that we can all experience one of those proverbial silver linings of the otherwise miserable circumstances of these days. À quelque chose malheur est bon. The virtual format enables us to gather so many of the contributors across a half dozen countries today to talk about the sources involved and the exciting ways in which the database offers access to them. And we have registrants from 18 countries. Thanks so much for bringing us all together in this moment. I specialize in early modern European cultural history and book history, and myself look forward to learning how to search for books in the inventories, although I apologize in advance for needing to leave the gathering for another meeting at noon. Dalme brings to almost 12 the number of digital history initiatives in the history department at Harvard. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to everyone and attendees to the list of the other digital history initiatives, which range across many times and places and themes from the ancient world to the Russian Empire, in case some other projects prove of interest to any of you. And now I'm delighted to turn over the proceedings to Anne Lester, who will introduce the next steps in the session.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. And it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm here to moderate this event and to welcome everyone to this virtual launch of the Dalme website. My name is Anne Lester, and I'm Associate Professor of Medieval History at Johns Hopkins University. But I'm also involved in Dalme together with Laura Morreale. The two of us curate part of a series of the ecclesiastical inventories that are among the many inventories on the website. And I just wanted to say a few words about what, for me in my own work, is so valuable about Dalme and Dalme's contribution to my own research on material culture and the methods of materiality, as we'll hear in more detail from the interventions today. I think of a principal import is the incredible work being done excavating the textual counterparts to objects in the world, and in turn making available a vast array of textual information from inventories about objects and material culture in the late medieval world. But second to this, and something that I come back to again and again, and I just wanted to highlight here for listeners, is the definition and working conception of what documentary archaeology is, which is so present in the website. And I encourage people to read the text that is there closely. It's something I come back to often. Because I think documentary archaeology as a method within materiality and material culture studies is an incredibly valuable tool to move us forward in thinking about the relationship between objects in the world and texts created in the medieval past that describe them, or what Dan and Gabe and others talk about as folk ontologies, as I think we'll hear more about. And finally, for me, as both someone involved in creating Dalme, but also a user of the whole project, one of the most exciting things to come out of it, goals of the project, is the notion that Dalme is creating a machine actionable data sets that people can then use and manage and compare objects out of the past across time and place. And we'll hear a little bit more about that today. So in my own work in Dalme, it's very exciting to bring these objectives together. And I'm excited to hear from everyone else today about how the project as a whole will work. So without further ado, I just want to give a rough overview of the event. We'll hear 3 interventions from Dan Smale, Gabe Pizzarno, and Laura Morreale. And after the 3 presentations, we'll hear and introduce some work from European collaborators on the project, And throughout this time, you're welcome to insert questions to me as questions come up using the Q&A function of Zoom. I'll then read through questions, and if we have time at the end, we'll entertain those questions in the last part of our gathering today. We also welcome, participants rather, are welcome to use the chat function as we go through the event, so that if there are questions or interjections along the way, feel free to do that. All right, well, without further ado, I want to introduce the three speakers for this morning's interventions, our sort of overview of the project. First, we'll hear from Dan Smale. Dan Smale is professor of history at Harvard University. And with respect to Dalme, he's the principal editor of the inventories for Marseille and its environs. Gabe Pizzorno is a lecturer in history at Harvard University, and his research focuses on the archaeology and ancient Mediterranean and Near East, as well as digital scholarship and methods. And he is indeed one of the co-creators of the Dalme project. We'll also hear from Laura Moriale, who's a visiting researcher in the Italian department at Georgetown University, and she's the editor of Dalme's Florentine Wards collections and is working with me to create a series of ecclesiastical inventories as part of the project. So without further ado, let me turn it over to you, Dan.
Great, thank you, Anne, and thank you, Anne, as well, and welcome to all of you who are joining us here. We're really pleased. I'm speaking on behalf of the principal investigators, Gabe and Laura. We're just really pleased that you can join us for this event. We've designed this webinar primarily to give you an overview of the just published site, the documentary Archaeology of Late Medieval Europe. Dalme is two things. First of all, it's a collection of resources, and principally those resources consist of lists of objects. The bulk of the collection currently exists, takes the form of household or estate inventories. And that's mostly because this is a type of resource that allows us to study whole assemblages of textual objects. But lists of objects come in many different forms. Just take an example. We have auctions on the site. We have lists of stolen goods on the site. There's a number of other things. There's several dowries and testaments and things like that. To a certain extent, we're really collecting any really interesting lists of objects that appear from the later Middle Ages. Now, scholarship on household inventories dates back to the 19th century. There was growing antiquarian interest in the material culture of the Middle Ages, and there's some really fascinating inventories and projects that began to develop them. Since the, 1960s or so, the volume of scholarship has been growing in a steadily increasing arc. And along the way, the focus of scholarship has changed. Initially, and I'm just going to very broad brushstrokes here, initially a lot of the scholarship was influenced by a concern to describe the living conditions of past societies. And this led to some of the major histories of consumption that we've seen appear in many European languages. More recently, and there's a lot of people here who participate in this, there's been a turn toward approaches that are grounded in a fairly different set of preoccupations drawn from fields like the anthropology of things and the cognitive archaeology. And there've been a lot of studies on this. I was thinking about this recently. This historiography was laid out in a really cogent seminar overview that Emmanuel Charpentier and Guilhem Ferrand at the University of Toulouse prepared recently. So you can look for that on their site. Now, as a collection then, Dalme provides scholars, all of us, with easy access to a range of materials from a number of different regions from later medieval Europe. And we think of the project really as just providing a service to the robust scholarly community that's concerned with the study of material culture. So that's the first thing that Dalme is. The second thing is that Dalme is also a research project. In other words, Gabe and Laura and I have our own research that we've been doing for a number of years, which we would call the comparative history of material culture in Europe between the 13th and 15th centuries. Now, at the heart of any comparative analysis is the need to identify patterns in assemblages and to compare those patterns across time and space. So by way of an example of this idea, the inventories of Jewish households in our collection have a really interesting feature. I've been browsing them recently because many of them, books are present in prominent numbers. So here's a question. So like one question among the many. Do Jewish households typically contain a greater proportion of books than Christian households? Now, the obstacle to answering this kind of question lies in the absence of a concept lexicon that would make it possible to bring together all the references to books in the many European languages represented in the collection under a single conceptual head word. In other words, how do you actually begin to identify what's a book if the book is appearing in multiple words? So that, in a sentence, is exactly where we're going to be going in coming months and years. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can one of you, Laura, Gabe, someone holler if it's great? Terrific.
That's good.
So in my own remarks, what I'm going to be doing is introducing you to the resources that we've already assembled up here in collections. And essentially, I'm just trying to give you a very broad brush strokes overview of the project. After that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabe Pizzorno, the archaeologist on our project, and he's going to be discussing some of the more, giving you a more detailed description of, I guess, the next phase of the project and some of the intellectual and analytical underpinnings of it. And then Laura finally is going to introduce you to what we think of as the public face of the project, including the featured essays that are published on an occasional basis on the features page right here. And then, as Anne Lester mentioned, we've asked several of our really valuable contributors in Europe just to say a few words about their collection, because we think of this as a very international project, and we're really eager to develop these relationships with all our colleagues in Europe. So the collections are located on this tab here, and you can get into the collection simply by the simple broad brush browse all technique. There's a filter that can allow you to simply narrow it down to date ranges that you might want to look at. What I'd like to do for this is to introduce you to another tool that we've developed, which is a map through which you can get access. It serves as a portal to the entire collections. So I'm just going to give you here just a geographical view of what we've gathered so far. Now, the project targets resources written in Latin and in various vernacular languages extant from Europe between the 13th and 15th centuries, more or less. Now, this raises a really important question. There are vast numbers of inventories from the 16th through 18th centuries. And as many of you know, this is the period on which the bulk of inventory scholarship has rested. Now, our own chronological horizons are defined by our current research interests. That's why we're focusing on the late Middle Ages. It's because it's what we do. But the most important thing to say here, partly as an introduction to the project, is that the platform itself can accommodate inventories from every time and place. So just to give you an example, Gabe is collaborating with scholars who work on the 20th century on a project that is using inventories of goods of Jewish households stolen by Nazis, and the project framework can easily accommodate that. So we are really interested in talking to inventory scholars who study early modern Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and the Americas. And the idea here would be to use the platform to develop sister projects focusing on these regions or time periods. And then presumably we would develop a cross-database search tool that would allow anyone easy access to the entire set if desired. Now, the geographical horizons, as you can see here, are currently limited by the expertise of the people associated with the project. The farthest afield are those from what is now Kaliningrad Oblast in Russia up here. These were contributed by Patrick Meehan, a doctoral student at Harvard, who's just completing a dissertation that features records left by the Teutonic Order. And if you're interested in these records, you can simply browse on them and go straight into the record from this angle. We currently don't have anything from the Byzantine world. I was literally just talking with my colleague Dimitar Angelov about lists of material culture found in Byzantine last wills and testaments. We haven't actually been targeting testaments from the Latin world, and I have to say the reason is that there's just way too many of them right now. To include, but the Byzantine records are really good ways of getting at Byzantine material culture. So that this is something that using existing editions that I think we'd like to be bringing in. And we have nothing from the Arabic speaking world down here, and we'd be very interested in talking to scholars who work with Arabic sources to see whether there's comparable things that we can add to our collection to give it a kind of nice global feature. Now, just looking at this map, those of you who are familiar with the landscape of inventory production in later medieval Europe, the first thing you're noticing is that there's significant gaps in our current collection. And I'm just going to run over some of these. The Crown of Aragon is really shockingly absent because there are masses and masses of inventories from the Crown of Aragon, the Crown of Majorca. Sicily, we just have a small collection of Messina right now. Again, there's lots of work that the Bresques have done from Sicily that we'd like to see if we can find a way to incorporate it in here. We have hundreds of inventories from Florence already that are just waiting to be transcribed, and that's just a question of time. Our collaborators in Bergamo, led by Ricardo Rao, have identified many Latin inventories from all over the north of Italy. And this is an area that has a little bit fallen outside a lot of inventory scholarship and inventories. And so we're really eager to develop this whole arc of sources from this area. Many of you will know from the work of Françoise Piponnier and Guylaine Ferrand that there's a substantial set of inventories from Dijon that we don't have. And this is something else we're in discussions about. There's a lot of materials from the Low Countries starting in the 15th century. Currently, we only have a small collection from Douai that Lise Saussure has contributed. Finally, we've targeted a number of German language sources, primarily in Basel and Lucerne right now in Switzerland. And so we're talking with colleagues in Germany and Switzerland to try to build up some of the German language sources. So we're hoping to fill those holes. This should not be understood as a representative sample of inventories from late medieval Europe. It's currently very skewed to the sources that are readily available to us. Now, what constitutes a collection? So here we have our collections. I'm going to take you into the collection page and give you a sense of what we have here. The answer is that there's nothing objective that actually determines what a collection is. So each of the collections you see here normally has a minimum of 25 inventories, or in some cases, prospects of reaching that size relatively soon. And the idea is that a collection should be equivalent to a small book. Laura's collection here, Florentine Wards, I'll just take you in briefly to have you look at it. Laura, I think that's equivalent to about 150 pages long if published in print, just to give you some size, some sense of this scale. Now, all these collections are defined by the research interests of the editors who own and create them. So to give you an example, the States of Savoie collection that has been put together by Paolo Buffo, who's currently a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Bergamo. Paolo is a specialist on the States of Savoie. You'll hear from him later. So this collection is defined by his own research interests. Now, something we've been aware of is that as research interests and collaborations grow and change, we expect to periodically deconstruct and rebuild some of these collections. So just to give you an example, Eric Nemerick, who's developed this set of inventories from Bologna. Eric's a doctoral student at Harvard in late medieval Italian history. He's drawn these from a single Bolognese archival series. Now, there's lots more inventories from Bologna in a series known as the Memoriali. And Lorenzo Caravaggi, who's a recent Oxford doctoral student, has put us onto this. So in time, the Bologna collection might well change as the source base, the archival base, actually changes. Where my own collection is concerned, Marseille and its environs, The body of Provençal inventories are all broadly similar, both from a diplomatic perspective and from a linguistic point of view. There's a lot of Provençal that works its way into the glossary of the language of material culture. So eventually, this is another collaborative project that I hope to develop with colleagues and friends in Provence, is to transform what is currently the Marseille collection into a set of inventories from the county of Provence, because that would be the most logical collection entity, mostly on linguistic grounds. We have a number of inventories, smaller sets of inventories stored here in miscellaneous inventories, and we expect many of these are eventually going to turn into these larger collections that I spoke of. So just to give you an example, Sarah Hines, who's a doctoral student at York University, she's writing a dissertation that's based on inventories in the National Archives. And there's a fascinating collection here already, and in time, because there's a number of inventories in the National Archives, we expect this to grow eventually into a collection. The selection we already have from the Crown of Valencia that Juan V. Garcia and Tono Belenguer have developed. Again, there's thousands of inventories from Valencia, and it's just a question of time and energy to build this into a collection. So most of these collections, as you've probably discerned already, are defined by geography. They're defined by a region or a place or a political geography. So currently there's two major exceptions. One is the collection of ecclesiastical inventories that Laura and Anne Lester are developing. And records can in fact belong to both, so that the collections that Lise Saussure-Douay have collected, because they concern the canons, actually belong in, they participate in both of these sets. Jewish Households, which is a collection that Ryan Lowe, a doctoral student at Harvard, has put together. These is a collection of inventories of Jewish households. Again, this is defined thematically rather than regionally, and there are records in here that participate in multiple collections. And Ryan's collection reminds me that a majority of the records that we have derive from original archival documents, transcriptions thereof, but we also republish existing editions where appropriate. So the Regensburg collection that Ryan has put in here came from a really valuable edition put together by Volkert several decades ago. So when editions are out of copyright, or when we've gotten permission from the publisher, we do include those on the site. The records from the Toulousain in the miscellaneous inventories come from an amazing collection developed by the scholar Philippe Wolff a number of decades ago, but there's lots more inventories from the Toulousain, and that's another collection of set will eventually go into a collection. All of these collections belong to their owners, to the editors who have created them. So this is a reminder that if you use these collections, we'd be grateful if you would use the citation button to give people the credit for the work that they've done. Now, as we all know, no inventory makes sense except when understood in the context of its own production. So for all of these collections, we have collection information or descriptions that give you some sense of what's going on, so that the sample will give you a sense about whether it's a full sample or a very random or small sample. There's links to our bibliography that can give scholars some sense of the essays and methodologies that have been developed. I'm going to click on here and let one load. This will take you to our bibliography. So you can find the things and track down some of the really important scholarly work that has been done on this. We've also built in a powerful search tool. And at present, this is useful primarily to scholars who are comfortable searching in original languages. So just to give you an example, at the seminar organized by Emmanuel and Guilhem last week, there was a fascinating talk by Gilles Bartholin, who was studying images in households. So just out of curiosity, I did a search here. You can see the parameters that I set up, words beginning with, just to get a sense and share with him on the spot some of the inventories that contain records, inventories that have images in them. And once we have the concept lexicon, this search process will be vastly simplified, and Gabe's going to have a lot more to say about this very, very shortly. So let me close now by taking you into an inventory just to give you a sense of what do these records look like. Now, one of the great advantages of digital editions is that it is relatively easy to include original annotations and marks of various kinds. And the Dalme has developed a subset of the text encoding initiative for use in the markup of our own documents. So we indicate centers, we indicate strike through, we provide explanations for text that is missing. Marginal annotations and notes pop up in a variety of ways. You can turn off all this by shifting to a basic mode if you simply want to get the text that actually appeared in the inventories. And you will find that some inventories, such as from charters, are easy to read in different reading modes. So there's a number of things here that we've tried to add to facilitate the use of the project. Now, Dalme is an ongoing project. And what that means several things. You should expect to see a steady increase in the resources, and in some cases, changing collections, as well as a new set of tools and resources for people to use. Just to give you some example, we're hoping to develop an interface that will allow potential contributors to propose new resources in a relatively simple and straightforward way. We hope to bring that online in several months. There's a whole corpus, the object as commodity, which focuses on objects that have values or prices, or objects that are in a commodity phase of some kind. We haven't yet put that online, but we hope to have that appear soon. A major priority, this will take a while, but is to develop lexicons of material culture in medieval languages. The most important element involves developing an infrastructure that will facilitate the comparative analysis I spoke of earlier. So on that note, many thanks to all of you for your attention. And here's where I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Gabriel Pizzorno.
Thank you, Dan. Let me share my screen. All right, hopefully you are seeing this slide. Excellent. Yes. So I thought I'd start by showing you this visualization that we put together a while ago. It's a preliminary analysis of about 1,500 items of clothing from inventories in Lucca and Marseille. What you're seeing is basically just counts. It's a very simple, one may even say simplistic quantification. You can see how many of a specific type of garment appears in the sample, how materials are distributed, how certain descriptive terms and how colors are distributed over female and male gender garments. But ultimately, these are just counts. Here's another part of the visualization. In this one, what we were trying to do is explore the idea that as a notary or a scribe goes through a household making a list, inventorying these items, the amount of time or effort they're going to spend creating a description could be measured in terms of a descriptiveness index, i.e. how many words they use to describe that object. One thing that we wanted to explore is the idea that they would use more words for more valuable things, but we also wanted to look at whether more words would be used for things that would be rarer or less familiar to the person doing that. For example, would a male notary spend more time describing a female piece of clothing? The point that I want to make from this is that both whether you're approaching this as simplistic quantification or you're trying to get at more elaborate concepts behind the data, they both depend on basically the same data set. And here is a part of the data table that actually informs that visualization. This is quite literally what the computer consumes in order to produce the analysis and the visualization. Now, as I suspect most of you know, however, this is not what the actual sources look like. As a matter of fact, that list is constructed from these hundreds of lists of objects, inventories, with thousands of sentences, just like the ones on the screen, where basically there's a very short description of the object, sometimes with several attributes of those, sometimes with very few. Just trying to extract the simplest of categories from sentences like these, let's say gender, color, and garment, requires making informed decisions about the sources. So for example, garment, those are the words highlighted, but as you can see, they're not always the same, or we're not allotting them to the same categories in English under the garment column. So questions that one has to ask themselves is interim and tunicum the same type of garment? Can we group them or not? How about mantellum and chlamydum? In what context should or could those be treated as the same category of garment? The same is true for colors. Different words are used to potentially describe the same thing. Making a decision about whether to group them together or not is something that can only be done in an informed manner. Now, quite often, these kind of decisions are not even about the information that's present in the sources, but about the things that may be implied or that are absent from the sources, the silences in the sources. For example, if we look at how to determine gender for these objects, should, for example, the things that do not have an explicit gender assigned be considered male as a default? Well, quite possibly not. But what if the context may suggest that? For example, if the list that we're looking at is a postmortem inventory of a deceased male, or what if we could actually look at a group of inventories by the same notary and find a pattern that assures us that, yes, this person only actually specifies gender when that gender is feminine. An exercise such as this has huge potential for discovering new things, but it also requires understanding of the subtleties of the document's production, cultural, historical, legal context, scribal traditions, linguistic subtleties, and a lot of work to go from these sources to the table that the computer can use to perform analysis and visualization. I'm going to switch to another slide. This is another visualization. In this case, we're looking at terms that could potentially suggest recycling. Now, the big point that I'm trying to make is that this type of analysis are not possible, certainly not within reasonable timeframes, without substantial aid from the computer. And that in itself is a problem, because computers are, well, quite frankly, as stupid as they are powerful. If you want to get something useful out of a computer, you have to speak in the language. If you want something like this to be more than just an exercise in simplistic, reductive quantification, you need to find ways to convey to the computer the subtle categories that, as scholars, we use to analyze this information. And the key to get the computer to help, to truly help with this kind of analysis and subjects, is to be able to give the computer actionable data and also detail an ambiguous set of instructions that the computer can understand. That's the only way to really realize the enormous potential of the tool. Now, we think that in order to do that, one has to answer three questions. The first is, how do we turn these sources into computer actionable data? How do we go from the manuscript page to a format like a spreadsheet that the computer can read and manipulate? The second question that Dan already hinted at is, how do we make cross-domain comparison possible, particularly across large and very varied data sets? This is very important. By domains in this case, I mean things from different places, in different languages or dialects, in different styles, scribal styles, and also from different source types. How do we compare these textual things we're recovering from documents with museum objects or archaeological artifacts? If we want to interrogate a data set as broad as, say, all the material culture of the late Middle Ages in Europe and get valid answers, we need to be able to answer this question. The third question is, how can we codify all these very subtle relationships and information that is not necessarily on the page in a way that the computer can use it to perform those kinds of analysis? Answering the first question is relatively easy. The necessary technologies have existed for quite a while, and even more importantly, over the past decade, appropriate methodologies have been developed that adapt those technologies to the specific research needs of disciplines like ours in the humanities and social sciences. For us, even the ability to get the computer to read the page and transform that into actionable text is on the horizon, although at the moment we still have to transcribe this by hand. Now, once we have the transcription in hand, however, we can get the computer to do a number of things for us, like parse sentences. We can use language-specific algorithms to determine the function of words within the sentences. What you just saw on the screen is basically the first step of that process. Once we have a transcription, we can tokenize it. We can separate it into its constituent words. The numbers are used to keep track, basically, of how the sentences are formed. From there, what we get is, well, a bag of words that basically forms our corpus. This is the list of all individual occurrences of all the words in all the documents that we have transcribed. From that corpus, we can extract a word list, which in this case just means a list of unique words in unique contexts. So, for example, frunis, which had been crossed out because it was a misspelling, we don't operate on that one. Item is repeated many, many times, so we're just going to process it once. The computer can then actually tell us, in most cases, sometimes with some research and help from humans, what the word is, how it's been used as part of that sentence, and connect it to some sort of reference, as you can see there. What that gives us is a sentence where the computer is actually able to understand what's going on and extract meaning. From there, we can extract information and build relationships between that using, for example, natural language algorithms. We can transform that information into meaning, taking also usage context into account. So from the first sentence, we know there is a coffer. We can assign a style attribute to that. We can establish relationships with the contents of that through something like a relationship of inclusion that is defined in a way the computer can understand. Even more crucially, we also have the means to store that information alongside the original text. There are markup standards. Dan mentioned the one we're using, which is the Text Encoding Initiative, the standard created by the Text Encoding Initiative, TEI, to mark up the text. So from the manuscript, we can go to a simple transcription, and from that, what's behind it is this annotated version of the text that actually reflects all that processing on top of it. As you can see there, the name of the individual that is referred, Raimundi Alberti, is actually tagged as a person. The beginning of the list is marked as such. Every single item described is marked as basically an item in that list. Numerical values, which are expressed in Roman numerals, are tagged and annotated as Arabic numerals that the computer can understand and use to process that information. The bottom thing is effectively what's behind the text that you can see on the website. Our ability to reformat the text by adding all the scholarly information or making it simpler to read or searching it depends on having this backend, this annotation that the computer generates. The more crucial aspect of this is that it basically allows us to store both a human readable and usable version of the text, and a version that behind the scenes has all the detailed, precise information that the computer needs to actually process in interesting and effective ways that data. Now, the problem of how to make all this data comparable across domains is vastly more complicated. Our answer is a methodological approach that we have called a documentary archaeology. The basic idea behind it is that when we are analyzing or deploying tangible things as evidence, we are never truly working with the objects themselves. We are rather working with linguistic surrogates. That is to say, we're working with descriptions of these things that can be more or less structured, but not with the actual objects. Those descriptions are the result of a process of encoding. As an individual, when you interact with an object, you identify it as an object, as a type of object within a class. You give it attributes. Basically, you classify aspects of that object according to a predefined system that basically articulates how those things operate. Like what color you're going to say something is going to depend on perception, but also on cultural training in terms of how to define colors and what to call colors. So as an example, as an archaeologist, if I excavate an object, or if you're a curator and you're looking at something at the museum, you're going to want to classify that, to describe it. Is that descriptive record that ultimately other scholars are going to use? Now, the system of classes and rules that determines how the linguistic surrogate, that description, is going to be created in the case of archaeology, a museum, is a very complex domain ontology. A set of rules that determine what we look at, what's important, and how we describe it. It need not be explicit, but it exists, and is the result, in the case of these disciplines, of very complex interactions between factors such as professional practices, methodological approaches, theoretical considerations, and it's all articulated through expert taxonomies, controlled vocabularies, and things like that. Our idea is that textual things are no different. So one thing that our research has shown is that within reasonably constrained scopes in terms of like time and period and linguistic scopes like a specific dialect, people tend to describe material culture in very similar ways. There is a relatively small range of vocabulary that people use to describe things. It's remarkably consistent and quite circumscribed. And so are the grammatical and linguistic structures that are used for that. So ultimately, even if we are describing these as part of everyday life and not some sort of like technical exercise, we're still using a set of rules to describe things. It's the result of this set of rules, what we call, in the case of, say, a medieval scribe, a folk taxonomy that determines how that encoding process of going from the thing to the description is going to work. What we're trying to do is basically determine what the rules of that folk taxonomy are. That allows us to determine and create a representation of those rules that can then be translated to a common one. For this, we rely on the capabilities of the systematic analysis of large data sets. We need lots of data to try to find those rules. But once we define that structure, the structure of a taxonomy, we can then articulate the principles of that grammar and convert it or decode it into something that is made comparable. Basically, we can take an object described in a medieval manuscript, decode it into our common ontology, in the same way we can take an excavated artifact or a museum object and decode it into the same thing, making them comparable. Let me give you an example of how this works, which hopefully will illuminate some of the detail. The example that I'm going to use is a color. Let's say you are an art historian interested in exploring the use of a specific color, in this case, blood red, or what's known in English as blood red. Because we were saying that searching a database for blood red, unless it's in English, is not going to yield very good results. In Dalme, it will yield nothing. That's simply because the corresponding color is going to be in Latin or vernacular equivalents. So in our database, these are the many instances that the color appears. As you can see, there are variations and vernacular variations of the Latin name for it, sanguineus, and another version in Latin as well, blodeus, that uses the Germanic root. There are also references in English and in German. If you search for just one of those, you will get the unique instances of those words, but that's not particularly helpful. In addition, you could not search something like museum objects, where, say, a curator would use Pantone to find the specific color code for blood red, that's 200C, or an excavated object. An archaeologist is more likely to have Mansell chips in the field. The Mansell code for blood red is 5R316. But if you want all of it, none of this is going to help you unless you want to spend a lot of time doing searches. So what we do is basically connect all that to a conceptual class that is not blood red in the sense of the English word, but rather the concept of blood red. We try to use open standards for this. For colors, the one we use is the Art and Architecture Thesaurus put together by the Getty Institute. So blood red, or what we call blood red, in the Art and Architecture Thesaurus is actually this ID. It's that number. That number, that unique number, represents the concept of blood red. You can see there that the name is given, but that's just one of many options. It's the preferred name because they're based in the US. But if you look under that, there's a list of terms that are associated with that concept. All those terms internally point to that one number. We are basically collecting information that would add to those terms, like sanguineus, blodeus, blood rot. What gives our system an additional power is the fact that within that organized taxonomy, the color blood red is associated with other concepts. If you look towards the end of the page, the bit highlighted now, there's a hierarchical position. Blood red is part of variable red colors, is part of red colors, chromatic colors, and so on. The idea here is that you can enter a search at any point of that hierarchy. So if, for example, you weren't specifically interested in blood red, but just in red colors, you could do a search for reds and get all of the words I described earlier, plus everything that is listed under the terms here, and for any other color that qualifies as red. So do a search for blood red. What happens behind the scenes, what the computer understands you to want, is the concept of blood red, not the words blood red. So it won't search the database for blood red. It would search for that number, 300.310.722. And that will yield results for everything that has been associated with that concept. So put differently, with this system in place, the computer doesn't have to operate using the ambiguous linguistic categories that we humans prefer. It can actually operate on the data using precise definitions that it understands and that it can use effectively. So since I probably have run over my time, in closing, I would say that happily this process also, the process of abstracting these helps us create those sophisticated and ambiguous rules that we can get from the context of the documents. So in itself, it answers the third question. How do we encode all that? Well, by going through the process of very carefully re-encoding these textual things. The idea here is that it would make it possible for researchers to interrogate very substantial data sets of material culture. That can be archaeological artifacts, museum objects, and textual things all together, because they're all represented through the means of language, but they have all been abstracted into a very precise language that the computer can actually understand. And we're very excited because we believe the potential of such a combined data set is absolutely enormous. And now I think I'm going to hand it over to Laura, who's going to show you some of the features of our new website. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. And I'm assuming you're all seeing my screen here, my slides. Is that correct? Excellent. Thanks, Gabe, for putting forward what we have to look forward to. It's very, very exciting. My job today is to introduce the public-facing aspects of the projects that we currently have, including the features page, which showcases some of what we've found while we've been working with these inventories already, and proposes a few models for how scholars might use the materials that we have provided currently on the site. I'll also give a nod to the collection, bibliography, and methodology pages that can be found by clicking through the site. But I want to start off today with a story from one of these inventories, the tale of a woman whose name remains unknown to us, but whose situation we're able to glimpse just fleetingly in a Florentine inventory from October of 1391. With this story, I will show you some of what is in the inventories, but also gesture to what is not, and provide an example of how the absences in our documents can sometimes take us beyond Dalme's lists of objects to think about who owned them and perhaps what that ownership might have meant. Now, our story begins with the inventory of the goods of two brothers, Piero and Bartolomeo de' Ligi, at least one of whom we learn was a coppersmith or a calderaio. Of immediate interest here is the double nature of the document. Nowhere else in this register, the MPAP4 from the Florentine State Archives, do we see two people's goods inventoried at once. But a closer look at the document itself, as it appears in our Dalme interface, shows that a double inventory was in fact not the original plan. While we see Piero's name written boldly on the title line, Bartolomeo's is squeezed in, written in superscript with the caret to indicate the point of insertion. Bartolomeo's name hangs just above his brother's, clearly an addendum to the document's original planned graphic layout. What follows in the next few folios is rather unremarkable, frankly, and you can see some of the items that are listed here. We find plates and pots, andirons, lanterns, cutlery, napkins, tablecloths, trestles, and tabletops, objects similar to what we see in this 15th century image of an Italian interior. And I particularly like the servant who's bringing this large metal tray. That's one of the items that's listed right in our inventory. Also among the items, we have the name Maria written. She's an enslaved woman who was registered among the pots and the pans alongside her son Giovanni in the text. And you can read more about enslaved persons in Florence in our current mini essay on the features, which I'll talk about in just one moment. But Maria is not the mysterious woman whom I first mentioned. The search for her begins slowly as we make our way through Piero and Bartolomeo's assets, finding lots of housewares, what the Florentines have called mazzerizie, but very few luxury items. Where were the fabrics, the rich clothing, and the jewels that we see in so many other Florentine inventories, particularly ones of this size? And I'll just mention that this particular dossier is about an average size at 6 folios. Now, the answer comes to us only in the 5th of the 6th folio document. There we find a second inventory, one that seems to postdate the one found in the first folio. At the top of folio 5 is a line that reads, "The household goods that were hidden, that is, occultate, by the wife of Piero de' Ligi." Here's our mystery woman who hid what rightfully belonged to her husband, which was then presumably found later by the notary or someone else who indicated that the goods had been concealed. And it's here finally where we find many of the luxury items of the household: capes and overcoats, gowns, dresses, tunics, and skirts made out of wool, damask, taffeta, silk, and samite, fringed and lined and rich fabrics, beautifully colored, striped and patterned materials, jeweled and gilded chaplets and hair accessories, silver buttons, buckles, and clasps, embroidered accessories, purses, sashes, and other fabric goods, bejeweled rosary beads, and other high-value items, so on and on. Now, clearly, Piero's wife, whatever her name was, had tried to make off with these riches. And if we think back to what seems like quite an opportunistic inclusion of Bartolomeo's name on the first folio of the estate dossier, it seems very possible that something had gone awry. Either that Piero or his unnamed wife were trying to cheat one another out of the proceeds. Who may have wronged whom, we will never know, since unlike many of the other dossiers, no testament was attached. So we'll have to remain curious as to why Piero's wife felt her only option was to conceal such precious commodities from the household at all. Now, this small drama, as I've related, plays out in just one of the 54 dossiers that currently comprise the Florentine Wards collection, with hundreds more to explore in the collections from locales listed on Dalme's sitemap, as you've seen. Now, in working with these materials, these stories regularly come to the fore. So we've created a special section on the site called Featured Inventories. The story of Signora Di Ligi, her husband and brother-in-law, will appear in the coming months, along with remarkable inventories containing, for example, the tale of a husband and wife, Jewish immigrants to Marseille, who perished in the waning days of the plague that came to that city in 1348, or the inventory posted here from a fabric shop, which lists different grades of cloth, accompanied by what we assume to be maker's marks that are roughly drawn here in the inventory. Sometimes, however, it's not the inventory as a whole that piques our interest, but rather one item or commodity that grabs our attention. Dan Smale's micro essay on the coconut shell goblet focuses on just one item found in an inventory from Marseille, and an essay appearing this month on sugar, how it was stored and how it was sold, looks at a foodstuff that was relatively new in the 14th century Florentine marketplace. Now, Dan will also take a look at the fur corset as an item of daily wear. Graduate student Sama Mamadova is planning a piece on the portraits of the Blessed Mother, found frequently in Italian household inventories. And Sarah Hines' essay on chests and coffers in English probate inventories is scheduled to appear in the coming months as well. Now, the final thing I would like to point out to on the features page is a section on the mini essays that we'll be posting, which dig a little deeper into one question or theme we see in the materials. Right now, as I noted before, we have a mini essay on the enslaved persons who are mentioned directly or indirectly in Florentine sources. That is, where they appear in the documents, whether their names and ages are recorded, and what their roles might have been in the household based on the clues we find in the documents. And here you'll see just a wonderful example. We've got a manicule pointing to Margareta, a slave who was eventually sold for 39 florins, as we can see in the marginalia. Now, new mini essays will appear periodically. We have one queued up, as you've seen from Gabe, on gender and color in clothing, another forthcoming on priestly garb, and Dan is considering writing up something up on animals that pop up here and there, as well as those whose presence is only intimated and not recorded directly in the document. Now, I'm eager to write something up about the different kinds of books that I found in the Florentine materials, from Latin grammars to choir books to romances, and they're all sort of kept away in the cabinets and the chests and cupboards of the Florentines with who I read about. Now, we hope that the essays on the featured inventories, on the objects, and the themes are helpful examples for how the inventories we've already collected and transcribed might be of use to researchers visiting the site. But we're also aware, as Dan mentioned previously, that careful scholarship requires an understanding of the context of creation for the documents that visitors find here. Even as the digital medium allows us to disseminate this material quickly and efficiently, grasping the true meaning of the documents requires that any reading of them is grounded in a knowledge of how they came to be and how they have been used by researchers in the past. So for this reason, each collection also features an introduction to the documents currently included on the Dalme site, so that users will have a sense of who produced them, when they were produced, in what language or languages they are written, and perhaps in what governing or institutional context. The landing page for the Lombard Alps collection, for example, lets readers know that the majority of what's on the site and what has been preserved comes from individual notarial registers. It's helpful to understand, for example, that the Archivio di Stato of Bergamo, just one of the Lombard institutions included in the collection, currently holds 233 cartularies from the 13th and 14th centuries and over 1,300 from the 15th century alone. So the relatively small collection currently on the Dalme site can really be granted its appropriate historical weight. The archives are rich in materials, and the collection landing pages will help to grasp the value of what we've included so far and what is yet to come, hopefully. Now, for those who are interested in digging further into the context of creation and the historiography of many of these sources, as Dan mentioned beforehand, we have this bibliography page with an incomplete but growing collection of secondary materials on inventories within the various geographic or institutional contexts. We're gradually building that resource as our collaborators contribute reference materials on the collections they themselves are editing. Now, for those who are interested, especially in the methodology employed in the Dalme project that you've heard just a little bit about today, there's also a wonderful overview essay that spells out the underlying principles, and then a more in-depth example linked to the publications page, both of which appear under the project tab. A short explanation of our workflow and our documentation norms also appears in this section. But as you may have noticed, the authorship on all of these featured materials is currently rather narrow, and we're interested in opening up this space to publish materials from the many collections we have plotted on the map. If you have ideas for resources to add or any other aspect of the site, we ask that you reach out to us using our contact page under the About tab on the site. For now, though, we plan to expand authorship on our site by asking our collaborators, whom you will meet in just a moment, to add to these features pages as their collections grow. But we also have plans to gather teams of transcribers together for a sort of short sprint transcription competition. And the winners will be invited to publish a set of featured essays on what they discover in the collections that they help to transcribe. So these are some of the plans. This is what we have right now and some of the plans for the future of the public-facing elements of the site. But for now, I know Dan would like to recognize the many collaborators who've already been working to populate these collections to provide such wonderful resources for researchers and students to access and then eventually engage in the kinds of scholarship we've modeled here on these pages. So I'm going to pass it off to Dan now.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Gabe. We're just going to give Joshua Magia, who's a wonderful member of the staff in the staff of the history department, just a moment to add our European collaborators to the roster here so that you can see them. So I'll just briefly tell you very little bit about them. And because we've asked each of them just to speak for a minute or two about the collections that they've been assembling. Ricardo Rao and Paolo Buffo are former collaborators at the University of Bergamo. We've recently signed an agreement with them. The materials that they've discovered from Savoie and the Alps are just amazing. I'll then pass it over to Lise Saussure, who's a postdoctoral scholar in Belgium. And then to Juan V. Garcia and Tono Belenguer, who just joined us and are working on the collections from the Crown of Valencia. And after that, I'll pass it up to Sarah Hines, the doctoral student at the University of York. And then finally, we'll jump back into France to hear from Guilhem Ferrand, who's contributed an enormous amount of material to the study of inventories in France. So Ricardo and Paolo, let's have a few words about your collections. Let me pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. Well, I'm very glad to be here, even if only virtually. And we are working, we are developing the Northern Italy collections. In particular, I'm working on the Lombard Alps collection, which collects chiefly inventory featured by the presence of agricultural implements, objects owned by peasants, which are often related to local productions. For instance, you'll find, I think, almost everywhere, almost in every inventory, lebites, the soapstone pots, which were also exported towards the Pope Lane, or caldere, the copper cauldrons used to prepare the butter. In general, we are very interested also in using the inventories to understand the medieval living between history and archaeology. The iconic image we have chosen for our collection, the Lombardops collection, is a 3D reconstruction elaborated for our PhD student Francesco Sala. So the 3D reconstruction of a kitchen in Valtellina, created using an inventory 1377 inventory and archaeological data. And I think this is, in short, the work we are doing for this collection, and I give the floor to Paolo.
Thank you, Riccardo. Thanks, Dan, for this opportunity. So the other collection we are currently working on here in Bergamo focuses on the territory of a late medieval principality, the states of the House of Savoy. So a wide area across both sides of the Western Alps between Italy, France, and Switzerland, which was composed by a big variety of urban and rural territories, but had a strong institutional centralization thanks to a very dense network of princely officers who had a common administrative, juridical, documentary culture. So these officers are the authors of most of the records of this collection. So let me mention the two main kinds of these records. First of all, we have about 50 big inventories of princely castles across the 15th century, which was written by the governors, by the castellans. And then we have some hundreds of private inventories, pupilar inventories, criminal inventories from the notaries of the local courts. So here's more or less the main typologies of documents we are gradually dealing with now. So, thank you.
Lise, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I can try to speak in English if it is not clear, tell me. So I'm a postdoctoral fellow of the FNRS in Belgium at UC Louvain in Louvain-la-Neuve in medieval archaeology and history. And my research topic is the production and the consumption of the copper alloys objects like bronze or brass between the 5th and the 15th century. And in this context, I study late medieval texts from the north of France, corresponding to the medieval Flanders and Hainaut. And my contribution to Dalme project is currently limited to a few inventories of movable goods of canons of Douai in Flanders, more precisely of the Church of Saint-Amé in the second half of 15th century. So I have edited a limited number on the website, but I hope there will be more in the coming year. And these texts, in addition to being a list of objects, are particularly interesting for the organization of auctions held after the death of the canons. And one finds the estimated price, the selling price, and the buyer, who can be another canon, for example, a professional reseller, or a craftsman recovering the objects to recycle them. So I'm very happy and glad to be here and to be part of this international project. And I will to thank very much the team. And well, so if you have a question, tell me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise. And now we're going to head back down to Valencia to hear from Juan V and Tono.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Vicente García Murcia, a professor of medieval history at the University of Valencia in Spain. First of all, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to be here with you, even if it's only through the screen, and to participate in this exciting and ambitious project. Well, my friendship with Dan Smell goes way back, having met him at several conferences, and especially during my stay at Harvard University in September 2015. We all are familiar with his drive and his ability to organize large projects, so I'm sure that the result of this one will be extremely important too. I suppose that some of you already know Valencia and may even have heard something about its archives and medieval documentation. For those who haven't, the city of Valencia has basically 4 large archives with medieval documentation. The Archive of the Kingdom of Valencia, which mainly contains the documentation of the official kings, but also judicial sources and some notarial protocols. The Municipal Archive, the documentation of the city from the beginning of the 14th century, the Archive of the Cathedral, and the Archive of Notarial Protocols, which are in the College of the Corpus Christi, an ecclesiastical institution. All this represents an enormous mass of documents, especially for the 14th and the 15th centuries. In the case of the notarial documentation, we're talking about something around 4,000 to 5,000 books, most of which are more than 300 pages long, beginning in the last decade of the 13th century and ending in 1500. In many of these protocols, there are inventories of post-mortem inventories, to which we should add those that appear in judicial sources. For example, those caused by foreclosures or lawsuits, guardianships of minors, etc. And the interesting aspect of the Valencian inventories is that all the executors of a will in Valencia were required to draw the map with the help of a notary. This means that we are not talking about a human universe reduced to the elites, but rather the assets of people, men and women, from all social classes. Thus, we can find inventories with very few objects and without even differentiation the rooms of the houses as well as others, with thousands of objects and detailing the different rooms through which the notary visited, in addition to making lists of the real estate, the loans granted, the animals, the servants, the slaves, etc. All of them are usually in the vernacular language, in Catalan. This is because the notaries who did write the other documents in Latin, because they used previously elaborated templates, do not seem to have dared to use the wide vocabulary that appears in an inventory. Some studies have been done on these inventories, but the vast majority of them are totally unexplored. And we are certainly talking about thousands of documents. I am currently leading a project funded by the Generalitat Valenciana, the local government, to study the house and the material culture through these inventories. So we have been able to hire several people who are helping us at least to locate them in order to, in the future, transcribe them and build a large corpus of Valencian inventories. So far, we are working step by step and collaborating, myself and Antonio Belenguer, who is working on his doctoral thesis under my direction, and we hope to be able to contribute as much as possible to the Dalme project. and Antonio Belenguer is going to complete all this information.
Good afternoon. Well, I'm Antonio Belenguer, and as Juan Vicente said, I'm a doctoral student at the University of Valencia at the Department of Medieval History and Historiographical Sciences and Techniques. Well, inventories are the most important source in my studies, and I'm absolutely convinced that the possibilities inventories offer to the historical research are significant. About late medieval inventories of Valencia, maybe the main characteristic is the extensive social range that the source covers. The social range allows us not only to study an isolated social group, but also to understand it in a higher context. This understanding provides us a realistic view of the houses, especially their interiors, that permits us to define better the living standards. For example, one of the inventory of Valencia, uploaded in the Dalme webpage, describes the dining room of Ramona, the widow of a tailor. In the dining room of this woman, she had a complete altar with all kinds of pieces to pray. For example, a little cushion where kneel down, and some fabrics imported, for example, from Damascus. What I want to say is, thanks to the extensive social range in the inventories, we know that the widow of a craftsman could live with a relative comfort. And that is not an isolated example, but neither the norm. There were also really poor people, even craftsmen. Other important point is that we have documents done after the death, as Juan Vicente García said, after the death of the owner, as well as when she was alive. For example, the donations of goods done in life. But we not only have inventories to know the material culture, we also have documents as public auctions that were celebrated in Valencia since the 14th century. In conclusion, there are a lot of possibilities due to the variety of Valencian shores. And well, to end up, I would like to say that it's an honor to contribute in this great project with our work. And of course, we are really grateful for that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tono. Sarah.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm Sarah Hines. I'm a doctoral student at the University of York, and my thesis actually focuses on inventories themselves. I'm interested in how they were constructed as texts, the translation of the objects and spaces of late medieval houses into the kind of textual form of the inventory that we find it in. The documents that I work with are late medieval probate inventories, and these are what form the basis of the collection which I'm editing as part of Dalme. The majority of the documents that we have which survive for late medieval England actually exist in a scroll form as opposed to a kind of codex. So these are can often be quite large documents, and they are normally organized around the spaces of the house. So you not only get the kind of lists of objects, which is obviously kind of the primarily concern of a lot of people involved in Dalme, you are also able to locate them very kind of easily spatially within late medieval homes. Probate in late medieval England was administered by the church and was done at kind of diocesan level. The majority of surviving material we have has come from the very kind of top level churches. Of those churches, the prerogative courts of Canterbury and York. So at the moment, the material that I've already contributed to the site is drawn exclusively from the prerogative court of Canterbury, which covered the southern provinces in England, those with kind of notable goods, often over £5, but sometimes a little below, of the kind of the southern areas. I do hope to also include some of the material from the northern provinces, which has survived in the York archives. So I'm talking at the moment with York Minster Library and the Borthwick about kind of bringing that material in as well. So hopefully it should end up as kind of quite a large sample geographically drawn from the whole of England. because these inventories are kind of notable goods, the movable household goods of the wealthy, they are elite. So they do give us kind of quite a representative range of different types of household. We have kind of merchants, traders, wealthy farmers, wealthy yeomen, but they are the wealthiest in late medieval England. So going forward, I hope to be adding quite a lot more material. There's just a bit on there in a minute, a little taster for you all. But yeah, so the plan is to kind of give that more representative sample into kind of these English documents and the houses that they cover. And just like to echo a lot of my other kind of colleagues on this, really excited to be a part of this project, mainly because it's going to help with my own thesis. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. That's good to hear. Guilhem, c'est à vous.
Je peux parler en français.
Oui, tout à fait.
Bonjour. Donc, je remercie Dan et toute l'équipe de m'avoir invité. Je suis venu aux inventaires après décès, après avoir travaillé sur la manière dont les individus de l'Aveyron ont vécu la guerre de 100 ans. Et je me suis rendu compte que tout l'arrière-plan, tout l'environnement matériel était quelque chose d'important pour comprendre précisément comment ils avaient vécu les difficultés. Et je me suis intéressé de très près aux inventaires après décès, en commençant à travailler sur la zone que je connais bien, qui est l'Aveyron, dont je connais l'ensemble de la documentation. Alors, j'ai contribué jusqu'à présent avec la ville de Najac, qui présente la particularité d'avoir des notaires qui écrivent en occitan et pas en latin. Mais j'ai l'intention de continuer. J'ai déjà repéré beaucoup d'inventaires en Aveyron. Et à côté, je travaille sur un autre monde, à la fois dans la qualité des documents, dans le volume des documents, qui est la ville de Dijon, Dan l'a dit tout à l'heure, dont j'ai commencé l'édition du corpus en papier, pour l'instant sous la forme de livre. Et du coup, je travaille à comparer deux mondes, le monde riche d'une grande capitale qu'est Dijon et le monde rural qu'est l'Aveyron. Voilà, merci.
Bonjour. I mean, merci, Guilhem, for that. That's wonderfully helpful. We have just a few minutes remaining for questions. Anne, let me turn it over to you. I'm sure we can stay on longer for anyone who would like to stay and chat with us or any of the panelists. But thanks to all of you, all our collaborators, for joining us. We're really grateful.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yes, thank you all. Yes, there's questions have been coming in over the course of this conversation. So I'm going to go back to one of our earliest questions that was posted, I think, when Gabe was talking. Austin Mason asks, do we plan to allow public users to access or download the TEI markup or lists generated from it in the future? So, Gabe or Dan, if you want to speak to this.
I can answer that. Yes, we definitely do plan to do that relatively soon. Everything that we're doing is open. So the idea is that at some point you'll just be able to create a shopping cart of inventories and then hit a download button. We just want to make sure that they're properly formatted so that whatever you want to do with them after the fact, whatever tool you want to use, you'll be able to do it properly.
Great. So another question came in from Gustavo Riva, who writes, again, thinking about capabilities here. We mentioned color as an interesting category for taxonomy, but what other categories would we consider to include to help researchers explore this material? Either of you?
Well, that's a great question, and there's a huge long answer, so we'll only give a very short one. But essentially, Gabe and I have spent a lot of time trying to develop the ontology of the object in these sources. And at one point, I did consult the database that Françoise Piponnier had made in order to see if I could calibrate my own fields with the ones that she had established. I won't name them all, but essentially we've come up with 12 or possibly 13 fields that we feel are a very standard element of the folk ontology. And those will be the fields that will appear in all the records that we create. Every now and again you find an attribute that doesn't quite fit in, so we're still adjusting that.
Great. And then again, there's a sort of compound question that I think is worth exploring a little bit, which has to do with location words and locations both of objects within the inventories and the inventories themselves. So maybe multiple people, Dan, Gabe, Laura, could field this.
We have been thinking a lot about the different levels of the question. How is this individual actually going around the room and making this inventory? Is there a pattern to that? Is there a way? Do you start with a specific room? Do you go through the room in a specific way? Do you jump around based on how certain objects are connected? This is actually one of the ways in which archaeologists look at material culture, concurrence, what things happen together and in what context. And we have been trying to figure out how to process this information. We have different type of location data, and we're trying to be very careful to distinguish between explicit location at any scale and implicit one, i.e. what we can actually ascertain because it's stated in the actual source, and what we can guess, and with what degree of certainty we can actually articulate that guess. I'll stop there. I think Dan wanted to say something about this too.
Nope, you summarized it brilliantly.
Okay.
I mean, I think once one begins to read through any of this material, the notion of location, both in a macro level, where and how our inventory is being drawn up, but also what's happening in space and what's happening on the page. It reveals so much in sort of multiple interlocking ways. I think those are all things that, you know, we as a group, you in particular in designing the project, have attended to and want to continue to explore. Certainly we've been talking about with our inventories as well. So a couple more questions along these lines. I just want to go back to some that came up previously. I guess one question I'm going to couple two together, one posed in part by Sanchez Geraldo and also by Francis Andrews, which has to do both with what kinds of documents count as inventory, so that question of wills, but also what kinds of specific inventories are being considered by Dalme, as in, would just book inventories work? Because certainly sometimes book inventories exist alone, particularly for religious communities, for example. So again, a kind of conceptual set of questions. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be happy. Again, that's a really, really big and important question. The simple answer is that we are open and collect absolutely everything. The point being that any user who wants to exclude certain types of things because they might be unrepresentative can simply exclude them from any set that individual is analyzing. So there's nothing that prevents us from expanding to lists of books, or for that matter, to lists of one object. So the only issue really is one of scale and finance. In other words, there are tens of thousands of last wills and testaments and dowries, and they all have fascinating objects in them. We'd be happy to hoover all that up and put it in there. The reason we've preferred inventories is because it not only can you analyze the individual object or the isolated object, you can also see the object in an assemblage. So it's a particularly useful for the question that Julie de Groot had asked earlier about the space. Those kinds of questions are answered best when you can see a fuller array of objects. But we're very open to all kinds of other things, including there was a question in the chat from Melissa about things that inventories of arising from criminal context that Paolo had mentioned. Those are often 10, 20 items long, but they're absolutely fascinating because it tells you things that have been stolen. I wonder, Paolo, if you'd just like to say a few words about that, since Melissa Conway had asked that explicitly, the question for you.
Yes, thank you. Well, let's say they are records concerning criminal trials against thieves, with which contain lists of stolen objects with an estimation of their value. And when the item has been sold by the thief, there is a note concerning the price of the set. So that's the answer.
Thanks. There's another question here from Sarah McNamara, who asks, is movement an important part of this work? And if so, would we consider mapping itineraries as well as fixed dots on the map? And in part, this grows out of other inventories that Laura and I are working on, which we'll talk about in just a moment, connected to the Dalme project. But I think other people have asked about, again, inventories that are drawn up as part of itineraries as people travel. So is there a way to consider that?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's a really interesting question. The kinds of inventories that I work on don't make that particular type of movement easy to actually analyze. You can see different types of movement in different ways, and maybe this is perhaps a partial answer to your question. First of all, Juan V had invited me very kindly to a conference, I guess it was a year and a half ago, in Barcelona on the provenance of objects as they are described in texts. And this is really the first invitation that I had had to think about the stated provenance of objects and the awareness that people had of where things came from. You can also have inferred provenance, so anything that is described as amber, we know it came from the Baltic region, even if the word Baltic doesn't, Poland isn't mentioned in the document. So there's many ways of getting at the movement of materials, and it's particularly true for fabrics, I think. A second type of mobility or movement, which I've really noticed in the records, are the fact that there's a lot of objects that show up because they are in houses in the form of pledges. So we can see objects moving through space in the form of pledges because they're described as belonging to someone else and currently temporarily in the house. Finally, and this is much more for Juan V than for me, because there's so many records of auctions from the Crown of Valencia, we can see objects as they're moving out of households and being distributed across at least social landscapes. Juan V, I wonder if you'd like to say a little bit more about the auction records, because they're utterly fascinating.
Just wanted to say that second-hand market is very, very important. And listen, in Valencia and Barcelona and Zaragoza, we have to study that, and it's a clue. It's a key. It's a key clue of the market, and it's very normal to see some object that you have in one home, and you can see in another home in the next generations. In some cases, you can see exactly the same furniture that has been sold and appeared in other home. Yes, it's very normal, and I think it's important to understand that objects has a life, a long life in the latest.
Let's see. One more, two more questions have come in. Maybe we'll just pose these two publicly. Dorothy Africa asks, do the inventories from private homes often include relics or reliquaries? And I'd be curious what other panelists have encountered. I know Laura has noted that not so much in the Florentine documents. I know for the work we've done, Laura, with ecclesiastical inventories, it depends a great deal on what type of household you're looking at. In a noble household, that is not uncommon. Occasionally a few, not a great store, obviously. But I wonder maybe what Lisa or others have encountered. Are there relics or reliquaries that show up in private homes?
I can certainly, I'd be really interested. I don't remember any in Lise in Douai, but Lise can speak to that. In Marseille, there's at least 2 inventories of private homes that list relics. If you give me a moment, I'll actually do a quick search for it. One is in the inventory of Johannes Kassa, and I can't offhand remember the other one. There's about 160 inventories from Marseille, so we're talking about 1 in 80 maximum. But that's a really interesting question, Dorothy. Thank you. I'd be really interested, Paulo, Juan V, Ricardo, Guilherme, do you see relics showing up in private households?
Yes, I have seen in two cases. There are relics in the home of a nobleman and a noblewoman that have some pieces of bones of of a saint, yeah, in his and her private chapel, yes.
For Douai, then not yet. I haven't seen any relics for that monument.
Il y en a à Dijon. At Dijon, we have three inventories, I think. I think.
Maybe a featured article to come would be compiling from these various collections to answer this question. Obviously, I have a stake in the answer. Another question comes from Henry Rubin. What potential is there to identify converted objects or repurposed ones? Do such objects carry with them the the indication of original purpose?
We can both do it. This is something that we have been very interested to look at. And in fact, we published, that chapter is out, right, Dan? Yep. We've been very interested in the idea of recycling. This is also connected to the question of movement. Movement, real or potential, is usually the way in which things enter the documentary or even the archaeological record. And recycling is a fascinating class of this movement. Dan and I have looked at, we have tried to identify certain words that are used in the descriptions of objects that imply that they are on the edge of being recycled, with some pretty interesting results. Dan, do you want to tell the story of the doors?
So one of them, Mary, was a partition downstairs that was made from two old wooden doors. So the doors had been fastened together, presumably with the metal attachments or fastenings, and set up down in the storeroom downstairs in order to create a partition. I'm just offering that as one example of the many ways in which you can see lives of objects. It's not super common, but it's a fascinating point.
Great. Well, I think, unless there's anything I've missed, other panelists, if you see things or if you have questions for each other, we could pause for a moment and entertain those. Because I know we've gone a bit over time.
Well, Anne, I would just like to go ahead and mention a few sort of follow-up events. Well, first I'll say to everyone, thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot to us that we have so much interest worldwide. It really is going to keep us going. But if you liked this and you'd like to see more, there's another event coming up on March 26th, once again via Zoom, called Crusading Things and the Material Outremer, the account inventory of Oud de Nevers. And Lester and I will be talking about this particular document. This is sponsored both by Dalme and the Medieval World Seminar at Johns Hopkins University. So I'll invite you to investigate this one particular inventory. So we've gone from looking at hundreds of inventories to focusing on just one. And so we hope that you'll join us for that. And then secondly, at the Medieval Academy of America annual meeting, as part of the CARA plenary roundtable, Gabe and Dan will be speaking a little bit more about the methodology behind Dalme at the digital epistemologies panel, and I'll be moderating that, and that will be Sunday, April 18th at 3 o'clock GMT or 11 o'clock Eastern time. So we hope to see you all there. And obviously, if you have questions or things to follow up on, please send us questions on the contact page, or certainly feel free to contact us directly. So thank you to everyone for presenting and for attending. And we hope to see you through some Dalme event in the future. Thank you so much.